But we'll have a recording for those who can't be here. And another thing, we have quite some speakers and only 1 hour. So we want to ask all the other people if they have questions or remarks to put them in the chat. And then Jip will see if there's a place where we can integrate those in the conversation. And maybe good to say here at the beginning already, we agreed that this shouldn't be the end, but the beginning maybe of more conversations about these topics. So let's hope we manage to organize that. Now, as a second, I would have wanted to
invite Dean Peacock from WILPF to say something
about, message him now.
But he's not here yet. So let's hope he'll be coming. Then I would like to ask Anthony Keedy from Abad in Lebanon. There's Dean. Hey, Dean. Sorry, Anthony, we'll come back to you. Dean, are you there? Yes.
You're muted. You're muted.
Can you turn on your microphone, Dean?
Thank you. Sorry.
Please.
Perennial tech problems.
Welcome in Emancipator office and in this co-created lunch session with PAX and WILPF and Emancipator. Ilse just gave a short introduction on how it happened that we are here now.
Great.
So she also mentioned WILPF, and then I wanted to introduce you, but you weren't there, and then suddenly you were there. So
okay, great. Good timing. Well, sorry to have arrived a little bit late. I had a few tech issues joining, but very, very, very glad to be here and delighted to share the space with everyone.
Yeah, wonderful. Can you say something about your background and work with WILPF and masculinities and how the photo exhibition came to be here? And yeah.
Sure. Yeah, so very briefly, WILPF is one of the oldest women's peacebuilding organizations in the world, established 110 years ago in 1915, and operating through kind of autonomous country sections in about 50 countries around the world. Big presence at the UN in Geneva and New York. And WILPF about a decade ago started working very closely with the Men Engage Alliance and has been a board member of Men Engage, I think, since 2014. And in 2020, we managed to find a little bit of money to start an initiative, which was initially called Countering Militarized Masculinities, Mobilizing Men for Feminist Peace. We were working globally with a range of international NGOs, especially Men Engage, and then also in 6 conflict-affected countries. And we've been really interested in this question of kind of how do we shine a light on the men who are living their lives differently? How do we generate public conversations about the change that is already happening? And you know, in my own work, doing work on issues related to men's violence, men and public health over the last 30 years in South Africa, which is where I am, but also in other parts of the world, we've found popular culture and, you know, arts-based approaches super powerful. They've generated great conversations. Here in South Africa, tons of murals and community theatre and the like. So we were really interested in using the arts in this project. And we were fortunate we were in touch with a number of really great photographers, including especially Piet Muller, who deserves a lot of credit for this work. Piet, if you don't already know him, has developed a huge body of really interesting photographic work on men and masculinities, including for National Geographic, and has done some very, very thoughtful work around these issues, men, masculinities, and conflict for a very long time, including in parts of Africa and Ukraine and other places. So Pete was energized by this idea of thinking about how we might use photography. So he pulled a very kind of influential group of jurors together, and we did 2 photography collaborations. We got dozens of submissions from photographers around the world for the first one, which was on the theme of militarized masculinities and alternatives to it. And we all felt that language was a little academic and didn't speak to a broader popular audience. So Pete said, well, let's, kind of pitch it in a way that's more accessible, and proposed this theme of men and love in times of conflict and polarization, to explore what love in its various different forms between men and women, between men and people of all genders, men and children, men and the environment, what that might look like. And so we got an amazing collection of submissions, and then selected a number of kind of, the most compelling images, which we have shared broadly, some from Afghanistan, from some Zimbabwe, Ukraine, range of different places, Colombia. And we have then exhibited them in a number of cities around the world, Bogota in Colombia, next to the lake in Geneva, last week, as part of this fabulous partnership with PAX and Emancipator in Utrecht, and then, this week in Amsterdam. And we just couldn't be more excited that this is moving forward as an approach, and that people are interested in it. Next up is Lagos. We will be having an exhibition with a slightly different set of images. We've got some great submissions from photographers in Nigeria exploring the same theme, some very kind of intimate images of roommates sharing the same space, living their lives as men in much more collaborative ways than we sometimes imagine is possible. So that's the story, Jens, behind the work. And last little quick anecdote, and then I'll close. In Geneva, I was sitting on the wall next to the lake, just watching people engage with the big posters that we had up, the big panels. And there were many really lovely conversations that I heard, including a couple who they were looking at that piece by Slavanovic, which is the piece where the couple is tied together. And it's a piece that one can interpret as oppressive, claustrophobic, or great intimacy. And they were grappling with that question. Is their relationship intimate or claustrophobic? How did they want to change it? And then it was sort of sunset, and they started dancing, kind of ballroom dancing next to the panel. And it was just this amazing thing to see, this deep deliberation and introspection about the nature of their relationship. Was it sufficiently emancipatory or not? And then this joy that it generated. And so our hope is that lots of people have similar experiences and similar conversations, and that it generates some sense of possibility about men and love in these moments of great conflict and polarization. So let me just close by saying how much I appreciate particularly PAX and Emancipator for the wonderful support and collaboration we've had over the last few weeks. So thank you, Jens. I know I was asked to be brief. I hope that was brief enough. Over to you.
Thank you. But thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for your talk now, and also for the wonderful work that you're doing and that you've been doing with WILPF before. I can say that in the past years, I've sometimes really desperately felt like, where is the women's peace movement in the Netherlands? I was at the WILPF conference in the Netherlands some years ago, and that was so inspiring.
100 years.
And now, in all these times of conflict and war, it's really difficult to find anything of a reasonable peace movement or a gender transformative peace movement in the Netherlands. So I was really happy when this opportunity came, and I'm really happy that we managed to very ad hoc create this session here now as an inspiration, I hope, for more peace work, gender transformative peace work. And when you were talking, I realized that in fact, the exhibition very much also contributes to the How to Talk with Men campaign that is the Men Engage Alliance is running currently. And I was wondering, have you or anyone from WILPF, I guess it would be you then, contributed with a little video for the campaign? Because the anecdote you just shared with us could be part of that. It would be interesting to make the connection there. And for all others, it's interesting to check for hashtag how to talk with men, because there is a lot of different stories from around the world. What kind of entry point we can find to talk with men about gender justice. Yeah. And for us, it was also an inspiration to say, and I loved that you included the word love, because that's what we really need. And as men, we don't talk very often about love, or it's seen as soft or whatever. So we chose to call this lunch meeting also Transforming Masculinities for Love and Peace. As an organization, we work a lot on preventing male violence, but mostly with a focus on intimate partner violence or street harassment or whatever. And now we're talking about like violence on a global scale, institutional violence also. Yeah, so I really think it's wonderful that we are here together. As a next step, I was going to Anthony when you were not there, Dean, so I'll go to Anthony now. Also, important Men Engaged member since years already in Lebanon, where things are really tough and rough at the moment. Anthony, welcome here. Please share us something about who you are, your work, your organization, how things currently are.
Yes, thank you so much, Jens, and thank you, everyone. So many familiar, inspiring faces of colleagues I've known throughout the years and I've worked with, and hello to everyone new. Pleasure to be here with you remotely from Beirut. My name is Anthony Gade. I am the Masculinities and Gender Technical Advisor at Abad Resource Center for Gender Equality, based out of Lebanon. And I've been working in masculinities, and we have been working in masculinities since our inception as an NGO, and even prior to that. We have many different programs working on masculinities, from work with young men, work with children, fatherhood, militarized masculinities, and we're very much also into the advocacy space, and as Dean was saying, and as all of you are pointing out, in terms of the importance of love, really working more in a space of discursive and different narratives when it comes to identity formation, when we talk about men and masculinities, and rather than that be localized to patriarchal and militaristic binaries of good man, warrior, bad coward, in these times, to really shine a light on the multiplicity of our identities and what we feel, and alternative ways of being a man, showing that caring masculinity, and starting off from very personal places, and really seeing how we instigate more of those conversations, and hoping that other men can find in that examples and a likeness that they themselves share. And I'm sure there's more to talk about that, but it is a pleasure being with you all today, and I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Anthony. And I realize now Ilse sent me a wonderful video with a wonderful poem of yours. That I'm afraid we won't have time for here now, but maybe we can put it in the chat for everyone to watch. It's a wonderful poem and video about of caring masculinity, I would say, in this world. Yeah, so where to go next? Gisela, because the women's peace movement, you introduced me to that many years ago, and you introduced me to the Women's Peacemakers program, which has been really a wonderful pioneering organization, also engaging men in this work. And regrettably, they ceased to exist because of funding issues. Maybe as a surprise guest, Isabel might join us today. Isabel was the director of the Women Peacemakers program. You have just been in Kiev.
Yeah.
So also a rough place to be at this moment. Can you tell us a bit more?
Yeah, I think I'm a feminist from the Netherlands, and working for many years on violence against women, gender-based violence, and women, peace and security. And I think
where I am now. And for the last 3 years, I've been working in Kiev for the EU advisory mission as a specialist on gender and women, peace and security. So, in war, during the last 2.5 years, I just returned. And I must say, when it comes to violence against women, gender-based violence, I kind of had I think, quite a good idea, a grasp on what the issues are, where masculinities fit, and excellent work that is being done, not only by Emancipator and PAX here, but also by WILPF, whom I used to work with when I was in Geneva. But what is less clear for me now at this point is women, peace and security. And I would say Ukraine for me was quite an important place to be because there's a very strong women's movement. There is openness at the level of the authorities and government to speak about women and men, gender-based violence, conflict-related sexual violence, a very big thing. But also there's quite a strong LGBTI movement who is, thanks to the war almost, opening spaces in society to discuss LGBTI issues, and to the degree that now same-sex marriage is in parliament to be discussed. And even when I arrived 3 years ago, this was impossible because of conservative religious ideas. So there is a lot going on, but I must say personally for me, what is less clear is, especially I would say in the EU, we are militarizing. There is a lot more emphasis on let's be prepared for war. And if you're sitting in the bomb shelter, you have to rethink everything you thought you knew about militarization and weapons, because I was very happy with those Patriot rockets that protected me in the bomb shelters in Kiev. Yeah, so I think this is a very important conversation.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So then Jan, also you go way back with working with men and gender equality. One thing that you point out, that you're very good in pointing out, is the day-to-day militarization in our daily lives, even in the words we used. One thing that I never try to use again, but every time I find myself slipping into it because everyone does it, is talking about bullet points. And we shouldn't do that. I know it's militarized language, and probably you have more examples of that. Please, could you tell us a bit more about who you are, where you come from, and how you see these issues?
All right. But just to start with, rather than a bullet, I use a heart in any presentation. So people can never refer to my third bullet, but to my third heart.
Oh,
and I've got
thank
many.
you.
And it's very useful and very simple to do. You just make it a list of your listings. Well, I'm Jan Reinders in the Netherlands, feminist, father, and a grandfather. And that's very important to me as well. And I've been working as independent consultant and activist for gender justice and sustainable development for many years now. Member of Men Engage Alliance. And in the Men Engage Alliance, I'm very active in the gender justice, in the climate justice working group and the global advocacy working group. And apart from that, we've started a new working group, and that's changing the narratives. Because so far, many men feel frightened by what feminist movement does. And we can't change our language, we don't attract a man. And what I've realized, many of the trainings that I do a lot of trainings and lectures and all that. Most of my inspiration comes from men and women around the world who worked in conflict areas, particularly in conflict areas. I lived in Afghanistan for 3 years. I was in Bangladesh during 3 coups d'etats, Sri Lanka during the civil war, was in Yemen. I left just before the war started. And I've seen so many things positive from men and from women that to me, it's really, I think we should conclude, it is not in a man's DNA to be violent, to want to have militarization, and it's also not in a man's DNA not to be able to change a nappy. And I think it's important to keep these things in mind, because the stereotyping that we all suffer from, is really, really heavy on men. And I think that's where we should go next. My experience now is if we can listen to men and listen to their positive stories. You asked how to talk to men as a campaign that we have as Men Engage. I would first of all say how to listen to men. Because my experience is really from listening to men, and they give me all these positive examples. And I often feel they're an exception. And when you then are able to make that exception to a new norm, going away from stereotypes, masculinities, going away from indoctrinating our kids to do as the norms tell you, then I think we get much further.
Thank you. Yeah, wonderful. And I'm going to introduce one more guest that we have here at the table. And maybe it's a surprise, but Rachel, would you like to join us as well? You're here with us now. We also go way back. I know you've been in Palestine also recently.
Yeah.
And you must have thoughts about this. So I'd like to include you if you want.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah?
Yes, I want.
Yeah.
Yes. It's first of all very nice to be here and to be connected with a couple of people who I know for a long time. Because yes, there are many connections with the whole men engaged movement, masculinities, and still, my most emotional connection is what's happening now with the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank and in Lebanon. And of course, that's an expression of the most evil form of toxic masculinities, of egos who want to save their lives, revenge is the only answer, killing a whole people. And that, well, I think when discussing about transforming toxic masculinities into love and peace, we can't phase away of the genocide happening at the moment. That first of all. But then secondly, and that's more broadly, when you want to make that journey from transforming conflict, toxic masculinities to love and peace, you have to face the trauma men and women and children are going through. So for me, this is a very important part of what are we doing in addressing the trauma to avoid that the repetition of violence continues at home, domestic violence, etc. And there are, of course, very interesting and successful interventions, experiences with that. I know a bit better, a living peace, what has been developed in DRC, but is also now implemented in a number of other countries, in Beirut, in Lebanon, in Syria. And I think I would like to also hear from all the partners around the table, what do you do in terms of healing, facing the trauma, transforming that into a healing for the men themselves, but also very much within their relationship, within their families, within the community. Without, it's impossible. But thank you for giving me this moment. And you can hear from my voice.
Yeah.
It's very emotional.
Yeah.
And happy to see Anthony. It's tough. And it's the most of part, and of course, PAX Christie, you are very much involved, is the silence from the West and let this happening. It's incredible. It's a shame to humanity. Whatever you call it, genocide, crime to humanity, doesn't matter. It's continuing. And people is disappearing, culture is disappearing. Yeah, let me keep it here.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for stepping in and being here and for all your commitments.
Yeah.
And for mentioning the word trauma also. That reminded me actually of what I had wanted to start with. Some years ago, I came across this book, actually in Dutch. Anne Cameron, The Daughters of Copper Woman. She wrote down the legends, the tales of the Nootka people in Vancouver Island. And it's very much about I think you could say a women's people and a gender equitable people, and then the Europeans coming and patriarchy coming and violence coming in. There is one quote that struck me very much about where I feel that we are, but maybe the whole world is. And you reminded me of it with the word trauma. It says, when I was young, they told me if a generation of people got pushed to kill another people, it took 4 generations of peace to get people's heads fixed afterward. And we hadn't had them 4 generations.
So act on that.
Yeah, really. And I don't know, in the past years, I've had the cringy feeling that people in the Netherlands sometimes even seem to be longing for conflict and war as something that we're all pushing towards that. And we're reproducing that everywhere in the world, of course. But like, as if as if the relative peace that we have been experiencing here is actually not valuable and not something that we should spread around the world, but that we should be heading towards more conflict and polarization and thus war and violence also here again. And I'm afraid this is also how trauma works. I know from working with children in other phases of my life that some children were so used to negative attention that is what they would be asking. And I think actually we're also doing that. I think many men are also doing that.
Yeah.
So thank you for all your contributions. We are halfway now. I think it feels like a lot of time already. Yeah, and there was a message from Goldie in Korea. And Goldie is our partner. Goldie came to the Netherlands 2 years ago. She learned to work with the Imagine toolkits that we created together with men from Sweden and good lad from the UK. She brought the toolkit back. She trained more than 400 of her colleagues to work with the toolkit. So there's much more Imagine toolkits there than there is here. And she's attending the AWID forum in Bangkok now. And she sent us a short video about the opening. And I found it really inspirational. I would like to share it with you if possible. But maybe it's not possible, Yip. How are we doing?
My computer
Okay.
has some issues, but I can try.
And if not, because as we're speaking here, I guess there is thousands of women and perhaps some men in Bangkok talking about how to change the world for the good and how to realize a feminist, gender transformative, equitable future. And this was, I don't know, I saw like it was 1.5 minutes. Can we get it?
Yeah, there's also a hand from Zine. I don't know if you want to.
Dean, you want to be before or after the AWID? I know you. After? Okay.
The video.
Let us be reminded of our collective power. As we come together, we bring with us stories of resilience, of resistance, of triumph. We carry with us the wisdom of generations who fought for a better tomorrow. We stand on their shoulders. We stand in solidarity with feminists inside and outside of this room who right now are resisting genocide. Activism, fighting for safe abortion, and an end to violence, all while breaking down oppressions of race, queerness, gender, and disability. This is a space where we build the world we want to live in. Here, resistance is woven into every step we take, from every corner of the world. We raise our voices for justice, for dignity, for liberation. Our work is far from done. We're here to connect, heal, thrive, and we will rise together.
Thank you. And Dean, I'll get to you in a bit. Are we still in the?
Yes.
Yes, okay, we're all still here. Yeah, and I had planned to show this video from Goldie already. And then yesterday evening, I got a message from her about actually the coup d'état that the president was was claiming there. So she was really in distress. What was going to happen there? It's a really recent history still of military dictature and oppression of the people. Luckily, it was all reversed, and we'll hope it will move in the right direction now. But again, also this is also a president who came into the presidency by mobilizing actually men's aversion against feminism and against progressive politics, and by promising to abolish the Ministry of Gender Equality and so on. So it's, I think, another example of how violent, aggressive, dominant masculinity is taking over in so many places in the world. And then I'll go to you, Dean. Your hand is gone, but maybe you're still there. Maybe you still want to say something.
Yes, thanks. I'm happy to hold off for a second if there's a conversation that is unfolding around AWID or other topics. Very happy just to hold off for a sec.
Okay, thanks. So my question now would actually be, in the 26 minutes that we have left, I hope to have an open conversation about where are we now, what do we need, and maybe how can we move on to develop movement, generate movement, develop strategies or whatever within all the limitations of our lives and work. But so please, and Anthony and Dean also being online, please share your thoughts if you like. I think you wanted to start off.
Yeah, thank you for the little video. I liked very much that things were connected, like fight capitalism, looking for democracy and peace. And I think here we should not be naive, because it is a long-term goal to work on masculinities, to discuss gender, to make our societies more towards peace, towards inclusion, towards rule of law, rights for everybody. But in the meantime, as we see it now, the world in many different countries, including our own, including in Korea, tends to move in a different direction. And we're in a situation where there is so much violence also against activists, zero space to even maneuver or to do something that makes sense and that makes a difference, that I think this is where we have to grapple with what is possible, because rising together, yes. But if I look at Russia, for example, obviously I've been doing that very much in the last few years. Everyone who is opening their mouth goes straight to jail, disappears, sent to the front. Most of the people that I used to know are in exile, in jail, or dead. In these type of societies, what is possible? And here I think we have a part of the conversation that's not so much in the forefront, I would say. These people, like the current president of Korea, the corruption, the links with that money that goes around the world in our banks, the impunity of these people and these processes. This is, I think, where our possibilities to intervene more. And this is, of course, what where I grapple also on then what is the most strategic, because we can't do everything. What makes sense? So I really liked that this was one of the things that came out of the AWID introduction. And of course, many of us around the table here have been attending other AWID conferences in the past as well. Obviously not this one.
I
would actually love to jump in, but maybe there's others online as well.
No, please.
Dean, would you allow me to jump in maybe now? And then, good. Because I love where you're questioning. Yes, exactly. Because when you were posing that question yesterday evening, and I was sitting with it a little bit, what are some of the most urgent and tangible issues? I see this kind of interlinking fault that sits within a patriarchal repressive system, in which we see this increased militarization and the normalization of that, as well as pressure on democracy and the anti-gender backlash that goes with it. And I think the movement that is AWID, the movement that is WILPF, the movements that are there at the local level, at the national level, in conflict-affected areas, that's where we need to sit. So for me, I think it's to counter this militarization, to counter this repression. We need to be in two places at the same time, and spaces, and have two thoughts at the same time, all the time. On the one hand, sit with those forces for good, the non-violent resistance that sits with it, but be very tactical and strategic about it. I've done a lot of wanting to learn more of it as well. on nonviolent action tactics and the role that women's leadership plays within it. And there's only now starting to be an increasing number of kind of academic research about this, where they're really looking at what are ways that you can be active in a repressive environment without being killed. And in Russia, for example, it's very smart putting messages on bills or putting little dolls in places. So acts of resistance on an ongoing basis to show and signal to others and hold those kind of messages in spaces. There are, like Gene Sharp created 193 acts that are there. In Sudan, they would spray paint goats and like the soldiers would run after them, and you're smiling already because that's what it happens, right? Ridiculize the men with weapons. But the message goes viral in a way. So there is the street smarts. At the same time, these militarized systems are systems of money, are systems of control, are systems that are deeply lethal. And thank you also for sharing and bringing your heart here, because it's incredibly depressing and bizarre to be in this situation, and to be in a situation in which that's normal, right? In which like wearing a keffiyeh on the streets of Amsterdam is something that would allow a police officer to ask you what you're doing. I'm just walking around. So two things at the same time: sit with strengthening activism, while at the same time try to fight the structures. So sue the Dutch state if they are not, if they're continuing to trade weapons. Get to the pension funds and the banks and their investment policies. And where my hope and dream still is a little bit with feminist foreign policy, as flawed as it also is, as we are as humans. But it creates a normative frame in which we can actually start to integrate, and I think masculinities in men more than we have managed to do in the WPS agenda. And I think, yes, there are structures and systems that we do not want to lose on WPS. But the Security Council has nuclear weapons hanging underneath it. So this agenda set within that structure might not be able to go that far anymore. So this feminist foreign policy, if there is more buy-in from Latin American countries, from African collectives, to actually be questioning militarization, to hold newer diplomatic spaces, to then be setting newer standards, can be really useful. It becomes very challenging if it's Germany and the Netherlands that are deeply involved and implicit and complicit in what is happening at the moment. But it also gives a route and another policy influencing route to bring certain policy offices together. So you fly under the radar of the political scene, and you go to where you can still make some of those changes. Yeah, so I see these.
You see possibilities.
Yes,
here.
and I see in a way within PAX, it's something we try to do, and under the current situation, it will be super challenging with the way that repression functions and the way that the authoritarian playbook is playing out in the Netherlands, is where media, academia, civil society are now on the chopping block. That's where the fight is. But that's also, and we have to be very humble to learn from those in environments that this is like a walk in the park in comparison to what they've been having to face for decades in a way. But yeah, so really dismantle patriarchal structures by always kind of working structures and these activist communities. Like how can you be with them in a way? And I think often as a peace organization working to try to support activists, we are challenged at times because it's seen as like, as a peace building organization, you should be sitting with dialogue and with power holders. And I think we've seen most change in the last decades with people organizing themselves and finding ways. And also gender normative change happens within those spaces. In the tents on Tahrir Square, during the Sudan revolution on the streets, that's where discussions started to happen that were not possible in the societal space prior to the revolution. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you. Nice for it, please. Yeah, and I mean, thank you for all that. And I think, and I'm also looking at John, I think one of the big challenges then is, and we can say we need to do all that on those two different levels. And an important question, I think, is also how can we motivate, engage, mobilize more men
to become part of that struggle, to feel they have a responsibility, to step out of just leading their normal day-to-day lives, or only doing that. We all have to lead our day-to-day lives. But how can we get more men to speak out, act up, and become part of the solution for all that? Because we're not with a big group wanting to do that big agenda, those two big agendas. I don't know, Jan, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I have quite a lot of thoughts, but I'll focus on two that I was thinking of last night. First, when I was a student in the late 60s, we learned about John Kenneth Galbraith, who analyzed the war in Vietnam and who literally said the economy of the US requires either a war or a project going to the moon to develop and develop new things. And that's when Agent Orange was developed, and later we have all these chemicals that are now being used in the agriculture to destroy the world. Also, the same thing is still happening because the latest American weapons are now being tested in Palestine as part of the economy to thrive. Now, that was the one thing that came to mind. So we're up against something very big because that's linked to the patriarchal notions of dominance, at the same time linked to capitalism and neoliberalism. So that's one thing. The second one is, if you look at the larger feminist movement, I would say that many men have got stagnant. They have not realized that the world goes on, and women have moved on. Men have got stagnant and now feel, hold it, the world is going over. The women are better educated, and it goes for many countries in the world. Women have better positions. When I give trainings and I ask, what are you afraid of, man? Oh, the women take over because they have better education, even in management situations. So we have to stop that. Hold it, why would you stop that? Well, otherwise, no. Then you get frustrations. But many men have as frustration in many of the countries of conflict I've been, is if you cannot be a provider is seen as the one who brings the money and the one who's able to get married, or marry, rather. Not get married, because the women get married, men marry. In some languages, it's even literally in that way. And if you see that these men get frustrated, when I was in Afghanistan, I had so many men actually telling me, because I had not able to provide for my family, I'll join Taliban because they give me the money and they give me a weapon. In Yemen, when I was just doing some work there, they literally said the same. Please prevent us men from not having any honorable job. So what I think as a second step we really have to work on is prevent the frustration of men not being able to provide, and teach men that is not only to bring the money to buy the nappies, but actually to change the nappy of your baby. That's providing. Both are providing. And if we don't do that, if we don't support the men who do that and get ridiculed by their peers, if we don't help them change that and make that, oh, that's normal, we always do that, then we don't really get much further. And then we are not adding to any movement towards peace, because then we keep building the frustration of men and we don't help them to actually live a more lovely life, so to speak.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, what I was thinking also, that's why I liked Awit videos so much. What I really learned to appreciate so much about the women's movement is the way they can celebrate and party, even in the face of all the injustice and violence and everything. So maybe this is also something that we can point out to men, that women just make better parties. No, I think it's not about the partying. Actually, it's about the feeling of also what makes our lives worth living. While facing all these injustices and doing these struggles. And I've always experienced it as a wonderful place of being in touch with the pain and the trauma, etc., and being very much in connection and showing us, giving me a sense of feeling of how life could and should be if all these things were not there. So that's really also living the example of change. And that has been very important for me. Yeah. Dean and Anthony, would you like to contribute something on these issues?
Dean, why don't you go ahead, buddy? You had the hand raised earlier.
Thanks, Anthony. I was about to say the same. I'll jump in since I have your encouragement. Yeah, this is a great conversation, and I really, really appreciate it. And it's I appreciated this last part of the conversation very much, because I think, in some ways, to deal with the problem of genocide in Palestine, the ongoing war in Sudan, the violence in the city in which I live, Cape Town, we have to name the problem in quite specific ways, right? And so I sometimes find the language of sort of toxic masculinities, it's useful, but it's so broad and so indeterminate in a way that I think, you know, what you were saying a moment ago, Jan, around indirectly the arms trade. The sign we saw in the Awood clip about Netanyahu as a war criminal, it gives us a focus and it gives us potential leverage. And so I, really agree with Ilse around the need to hold this sort of complexity. And I'm hearing multiple strands of complexity. One is for those of you who live in the global north, who have access to governments that are spending money on arms that are going all over the world, or who create and sustain havens for illicit financial flows, or who thwart efforts to stop transnational crime, block meaningful human rights resolutions and actions. I think the work of naming the men in positions of power, but also naming the systems that coexist alongside patriarchy, as you did a moment ago, Jan, right? Like capitalism, neoliberalism, colonialism. We have to hold an analysis that I think gives us leverage. And I think one of the ways we do that is to name the institutions and the people in them. Here in South Africa, we were part of a large class action lawsuit against the entire gold mining industry. Now, of course, the practices of the gold mining industry are inextricably tied up in patriarchal norms, but we didn't try and transform the norms in the gold mining industry. We simply litigated against them because the relief that miners and their families were able to get that way was far greater than had we run workshops with the men, encouraging them to wear masks in the mine shafts, or had we encouraged men in positions of power to hold more benevolent, more thoughtful, more human rights focused positions. Like, I just don't think we would have succeeded. So, I guess my point here is, how do we do the work that motivates men in communities across the world to step up and to take action, to see these issues as, collective responsibilities that we all have an investment in? And how do we also hold people in positions of power to account, and what tools do we have available to do that? And so, we put this art exhibition together without a naivety that it in and of itself is a, emancipatory strategy, but it's one of the many tools we have. And in this instance, it allows us to have this really important conversation that's spanning the spectrum from structural accountability through to the importance of recognizing joy as a motivating force in men and women and people of all genders' lives. So, yeah, I think it's about broadening our skill set as a, movement, if we want to call ourselves that, and thinking very strategically about who we partner with, who we learn from, and, this key question that I think animates feminist activism and certainly WILPF's activism for 110 years, which is, how do we make demands on the men in positions of power? Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Dean. Yeah. Anthony?
Yes, it's very difficult to add anything to, the amazing contributions this far. I think I would just agree more so, and maybe say, Michelle, thank you for how much your heart shows and wearing your heart on your sleeve. And I think as a man who has been in feminist spaces and learning from feminists, it's that type of power, it's that type of leadership, it's that type of activism that inspired me. Conversations with Ilse, our work with WILPF, Isabel, who is not here today, but these are feminist leaders who really, women leaders who have really made me understand what type of a man I want to be, and what type of a power I want to display, and what type of care I want to exude on a regular basis. And I think a lot of feminist peace building is that on a macro level. Very simplistic said, but it's very true. When I see that, it's inspiring, and it makes me want to be that. And I think that's exactly what we need in our messaging. This is why the arts can be so important. I believe it's also about breaking down the false narratives that people have been fed all of their lives from people with power. I think that's an important to be the counterculture always, to make sure that is housed within a feminist perspective. Dean just said, how diverse militarized masculinities are, and I often think about that when there are discussions about police brutality in the West. And just racist derivations of militant masculinity. I think about PTSD, and I think about how the glorification and celebration of these false idols of good warriors exist when in actuality men come back from war and can't unsee what they saw, men and women who are even the aggressors, not just the ones who are victims of that violence and survivors of that violence, but they themselves come back. And there's no aid to them. So it's kind of blowing away the smoke and breaking all the mirrors that are associated with this patriarchal militant masculinity and talking from a real human space. And this is where the real work on the ground comes. Again, WILPF and the Women Peacemakers program, many years ago, more than I would like to say, we literally trained me, and we went and trained others globally and from the region in gender-sensitive active nonviolence. So how do we get strategic? How do we sit down and put our minds to work about shifting the power discussion from this power over discussion to power with? What does that look like? What resources are necessary? What dangers exist? So not just talking in the theoretical, but actually putting it down on paper and seeing how difficult that work is, how challenging that work is. But how necessary it is. And it's only when we do that I think we can make a change on the ground. And then last thing I'll allude to, but everyone else has already said it, it's about real accountability for people with power. One of the difficult things to do here in the third world or in the global south, or maybe just in Lebanon in conflict settings, I don't want to generalize, but is to have a discussion about peace building, disarmament, why we should be active, nonviolent, peaceful actors as men, as an individual who works with us. And then when you look at the other side, and there is no halt to the missiles, there is no halt to the bombs, there's celebrations and almost complete faith in actors who are acting violently. It comes down to the same story of brown men, people who are disenfranchised, people who are marginalized. They're the ones who need to stop being violent. Whereas the people who are backed by the West, the people with money, their violence is justice. Their violence is heroism. Their violence is celebratory. It is the yin to our yang. And again, this binary type thinking that's dictated by people with power is the number one poison of the world. And without any accountability, when I try to say a message of peace to people here, they look at me like I'm the one with eyes on the bottom of my head or on the bottom of my feet, that I can't see things clearly, because that's not the power over system that's at work. So again, just as Dean was saying, as other people are saying, how do we hold people accountable in power? Where can we hold them accountable? And how do we buckle down even more on this impunity? Because otherwise it's just lip service, and it's just setting up more councils and more narratives to make everyone look good while they continue to burn little children all around the world.
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. I would almost think that would be the closing, but we have 3 minutes left. So is there anyone here who would like to say a few closing words? And maybe we go over the hour a little bit for each of us to say whatever you would like to share. Rachel, do I see movement with you?
Maybe it's not a closing word, but I'm just wondering whether there are also connections between what we are discussing today with the whole decolonization movement, because there you see also a lot of protests against misogyny and well, course, against the colonial power, but I'm also wondering how much reflection already is going around masculinity. So in broader general terms, I think it's also a matter of making connections or strengthening connections between various movements. Decolonization is one. Peace.
Environment movement.
Environment.
Absolutely.
Well, at the moment, I'm placed at Greenpeace, and there I come across this movement, discussion, debate from within, and links with racism, links with Islamophobia, with patriarchal. But I think that's also still an area to be further digged in, explored, operationalized.
Thank you. And I just want to say, yes, we shouldn't call this closing remarks. We should call it continuation remarks.
Absolutely.
To be continued. But please, some words, and let's not dive into too much conversation. Now we can do that after closing the session here. But
I'd just like to add that in terms of education, we should really stop dictating our kids, boys and girls, to fit into the straitjacket of the gender norms and values. And if we don't do that, if we don't actually appreciate man for being a man deviating from the gender norms, we actually push them to Andrew Tate.
Absolutely.
I remember, Anthony, I think in the first session, Anthony, I saw you present something. You said something like, we teach boys to use weapons or guns or swords, whatever, before teaching them to read books even.
Or to love.
Or to love or whatever. So I agree.
And I think we should keep in good feminist tradition, this personal, this long-term change that we are looking for with the far more political. And that we need to discuss what are successful strategies to go towards accountability, to go towards the end of impunity when it comes to violence against women, gender-based violence, and institutional violence. I think there is a world to be won when we look at successful strategies. And then, of course, I like very much Dean's remark, be specific, and every situation you have to make the situation on the ground and the specifics of the location count.
Yes. Thank you. Ilse.
It's just a lot of different elements in my mind, but I do have hope, although it's black and it's dark around us in a way, because there is movement always. So there's will always be resistance.
There always is.
And then we're more capable now than we have been to function internationally, to function in solidarity, but to make that solidarity as political. And and make it effective. So like what language we use, Jan, who we are challenging in what way, and how can we dare start to transform things and work within that. And I think then it will always be a challenge, because it's from my side, even as a gender advisor inside a peace building organization, you work to take your colleagues along in this work. Then you're working to try to take political actors along. And then you try to engage men in positions of power. And it's a very politically careful situation in which you don't want to put some of the activists in danger, in a sense. So it's really about strategy and about kind of where can we now place resources. But we also need to find a way to be able to resource ourselves. Well, we don't have this kind of ODA funding anymore. And I think the complexity that Dean also mentioned is crucial, but also daring to be very political about it.
Thank you. So Dean, Anthony, last continuations words.
Anthony, you go ahead first this time.
So you want to have the last words?
I will just say thank you to everyone for a lively discussion. Hopefully it does continue. What everyone said, I maybe just as one extra thing that's always questioned me is also, what are we speaking about the lobbies that exist? In what ways do we also look for these hidden forms of drivers of this type of violence from the top level to the very personal level? So, and thank you for everyone here for all of your work, for continually inspiring me, and hope that this is the first of many.
Thank you for being here, Anthony.
Thanks for joining.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So, Dean.
I'm not going to try and say anything sort of, I feel like the complexity is fantastic and don't want to add to that. I really just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for this rich and energizing conversation and for the many years of collaboration. It's been great to see some people who I haven't seen in a very long time, Rachel and Jan, and to be in the space with other people who I haven't met previously. So I look forward to other opportunities. Come and join us for the exhibition in Lagos in January or February. Please know that the materials that we've developed together are available for use. If there's another place you'd like to display them, we're very, very happy to work with you on that. We've also got some great outdoor images that can be posted onto the side of a wall or on a construction site, slightly more guerrilla art for those who feel like doing that. So yeah, from me, just a thank you so much, and look forward to staying connected. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dean, also for being here, for all the great work. I want to close the session now. I saw one hand raised before, but it's gone again. And I hope it's not too bad if I close it anyway.
Nothing in the chats, no questions.
No chats, no chat questions or remarks. Let's say this is not the end, but the beginning of more talks. I don't know when and how we're going to realize that. Sometimes we need ad hoc pressure, but it was really wonderful to have you here, to have you all here. Thanks for being part of the conversation, even if you were just listening. And spread the word. We have a recording. We'll make it available somehow, somewhere, sometime. Please follow our communications or other communications to find out when and if, and then you can share it with other people or listen with your colleagues and discuss what else you can do.
Excellent.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you for organizing.
Thank you.